Hello, this is the weekend grab bag for the weekend, 3rd of May 2025. And we're going to be meeting some recent graduates from NYU who have won themselves some extremely useful degrees. We're going to be talking about a worldwide joke to do with climate change, starting with a helicopter weather station in Britain and the outage in Spain, of course. Then we're going to be meeting a very useful chap who does amazing things with vacuum cleaners. And we're going to be visiting the trans issue with Nadia Whittome MP before we move on to the issue of what's going on in Syria. Believe me, it's going to be a short clip, but well worth watching, unfortunately. And we're going to end up with a loose kangaroo. I'm Granniopteryx. If you're in the UK, Gab and BitChute are effectively blocked in this bastion of free speech. So, although I'm on those channels, you'll have to use a VPN that pretends it's somewhere else if you're in the UK. However, you don't need a VPN to access my X channel, YouTube, Rumble and Minds, where at least for the time being, my videos are unrestricted, if not always monetized. Well, there are going to be some very happy parents now as their children have graduated from college. And these are the fresh, happy, smiling faces of people who are certain to be highly employable in the coming labour market. Let's start with this.
My name is Jacob and my concentration is environmental science and sustainable business.
Environmental science and sustainable business. I just wondered whether he might be involved in future in something like this. Spain, it said here, hits the first weekday of 100% renewable power on the national grid. That was on April the 22nd. On April the 28th, we had this. Because what happened was that Spain, Portugal and parts of France had a complete shutdown of all the electricity supply, and trains stopped. These people will be outside the train because, of course, the inside of the train will be heating up quite a lot, and no electricity, no air conditioning. What else we have here? Power cut chaos in Spain and Portugal caused by rare atmospheric phenomenon, says operator. Do you think it's probably got something to do with all the hot air being emitted by the sort of people who get degrees in science and sustainable business? Okay, let's go on.
Hi, my name is Lex, and my concentration is the performance of self.
The performance of self. Wow, that's really going to be useful in the future job market. Now let's see who this happy young person is going to be in a year or so.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle. My concentration is creative direction, production, and narrative through the arts, performance, and written word.
Hi.
Okay, she's performing. let's see how employable she'll be in theatres where there's no air conditioning and the electricity has cut so people can't get to the venue.
Hi, my name is Karina Gomez, and my concentration is in journalism and Latin American studies.
That sounds good. That might work.
With an emphasis in human rights.
Oh, no. So you're going to end up trying to fight for one of those very few and diminishing places on the New York Times, are you?
It's collective memory and political violence.
Oh, collective memory and political violence. Right. Why not just journalism, huh? Why not just journalism? No, because what you're really getting a degree in is indoctrination, of course.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Lee, and I studied the sociology of environmental communication.
The sociology of environmental communication. I suppose she could get a job in Birmingham Council. You've got lots of people doing environmental. I'm talking about Birmingham in the mother country, of course, because at the moment there's a strike going on and there are bags of rubbish piled up against buildings, walls, in open spaces everywhere. And of course, there's a huge population of very fat rats. I'm sure there are lots of people doing a lot of environmental communication at the time, mostly outside the council, asking them when they're going to remove the rubbish.
Hi, my name is Reed, and I study music business and gender studies.
Music, business and gender studies? She may decide to become a singing telegram?
Hi, my name is Dominique, and I studied care politics with a minor in disability studies.
Care politics with a minor in disability studies. Now look, we need people who know how to take care of disabled people. We don't need people to approach the care of disabled people by talking about politics. The disabled people aren't interested in politics. They're just interested in getting a proper bath with the help that they need for it, or a meal or something like that. Yeah? I don't know what sort of a care person she's going to be, but I suspect she thinks that she's going to be a manager and she'll run a team of underpaid illegal migrants who will be actually doing the work. That's what I think she thinks her degree is going to do. And at the same time, she can talk about the politics of oppressed illegal migrants while they're doing their job. You know, it's all very constructive.
My name is Elliot Wright, and my concentration is art as a social mechanism.
Art as a social mechanism. How about art as art? How about that? I mean, the Romans came up with that, wasn't it? Ars gratia artis, 2,000-3,000 years later, and we've got this, oh, what a falling off was there, right?
Hi, I'm Georgia, and my concentration is dramatic writing and theatrical adaptation.
And I'm sure the concentration of other people might be on other matters, actually.
My name is Noah Loyacano, and my concentration is equilibrium or negotiated paradox.
Equilibrium or negotiated paradox. Do you know, that reminds me of a radio play that was broadcast on American radio. And I think it was, now I'm trying to remember the name of the series, but it was science fiction stuff. Was it something like X? Anyway, it was about two people who were musicians and they just lost their jobs because machines could play the flute and the violin better than they could. And they didn't know how to break the news to their wives that they were now without a job. And they met each other in a bar where they were getting drunk, and they came up with the idea of inventing a job for themselves so they could get government grants. And the next day they met up again because they realised that these drunken ideas were not so bad. And they decided to go to the job there was a sort of place where you registered a job. And one of them registered as an umbrological parallax calculator. It was something like this. And the other one as a parallax calculator inspector. It was something like that. And they tried to, and when the guy in the job centre asked, what does that mean? So he said something like, well, you know, when you've got an umbra, you have to calculate the parallax. It was something like that. It was very funny. And it was meant to be a joke. I think we've found that it isn't a joke after all. His concentration, what does it mean? His major? Anyway, his concentration is equilibrium or negotiated paradox. That is just brilliant. Okay, next.
Hi, my name is Sophie Lopez, and my concentration is titled Queering and Decolonizing Theater.
Her concentration is titled Queering and Decolonizing Theatre Practice. That's going to go a bomb, you know. I mean, she's going to be employed by one theatre after the other, isn't she?
Practice. Hi, my name is Maya, and my concentration is journalism.
That sounds good. Don't spoil it. Oh, no. Post-colonial studies and psychoanalysts. That means, again, you've got didactism. Didactism? I suppose it's a word. So it's not journalism, what you're learning at young woman, especially, I mean, you could see that from the shawl she's wearing around her shoulders. This isn't journalism, is it? You're going to be an ideologue. You're going to be a purveyor of propaganda for one organisation or another, aren't you, dear?
Hi, I'm Eloise. I'm graduating with a concentration in philosophy of science and theatre.
Well, philosophy of science, I understand. I just don't see how it connects to theatre. So I have an idea it's not going to be a very deep study at all.
My name is Amina, and my concentration is titled The Criminal Mind, which is surrounded on criminology and applied psychology.
Well, just a minute. Hang on. A concentration, which I'm trying to translate here, I'm assuming that means a major, is titled. So it doesn't mean it is, it means that's the title it has. They're all saying that. Her concentration is titled. Instead of saying, I am studying X, her concentration is titled. Now, if you might remember there's something in, I think it was Alice Through the Looking Glass. Was it Alice Through the Looking Glass or was it A.A. Milne? Oh, there are two of them. Yeah, so it was sitting on a gate. This was, okay, so let's get this straight. This was Lewis Carroll, and it was the White Knight, and he was talking to Alice, and he had a poem he wanted to recite her, which was, I think, called A Sitting on a Gate. And he said, my poem is titled, and then he gave a name for it. Which I don't remember right now. And then Alice said, oh, so that's what he did. So he said, no, that's just what the title is. And I got this confused with A.A. Milne because Pooh Bear had, he said he lived in a house under the, or maybe it was Piglet, one of them, lived in the house under the title of Mr. Sanders. I think that's what the name was. But that wasn't him. That was just the title. So this is something that writers have been amused about for a while. And it looks like the jokes from the writers of previous years are now being realised in these young people. Her concentration is titled, okay, The Criminal Mind.
Which is surrounded on criminology.
And it's surrounded on? I mean, what? Okay, when you're surrounded by the way, because on is on and surrounded is around. They're two different things. And so this is somebody who doesn't think what she's saying, doesn't listen to what she's saying, or her teachers, more likely, aren't listening to what they're saying. And, okay, so the criminal mind, which has subsidiary studies of criminology, fair enough, and applied psychology. Well, it sounds nice, except that since she can't use language to start with, titled The Criminal Mind, surrounded on, I don't really feel like she's probably going to come out with anything intelligible when she gets out into the wide world, because she's not getting out with anything intelligible here.
Just surrounded on criminology and applied psychology.
Hi, my name is Juliana. My concentration is international business and fashion through
International business and fashion. I thought that sounded quite good because the fashion industry is international and there are many issues surrounding that. So, I mean, it's a reasonable area for study. I wouldn't say it should be a focus of study. I'd say that was more to do with economics, but okay, it sounds all right. And then
through sustainable
development. You get those companies in China, you know, like Shein, making all that cheap clothing in these dreadful workshops for, well, basically slave pay. You get them to listen to you. You won't do that with your degree or concentration in international fashion and sustainable development. The two just don't go together. They won't go together because, and here in the West too, they won't be listening. So I don't know who you'll be talking to when you've grown up, my girl.
Yay!
Well, they all seem very happy, don't they? Let them have their moment in the sun. It's not going to last. So we'll start with a colossal practical joke that apparently the global climate observing system is playing on you. Now, the global climate observing system is one of the most important climate monitoring networks in the world. It's co-sponsored by the World Meteorological Organization, WMO. It seems that if it has any W in front of it, you've got to be really careful, like with the WHO, the World Health Organization. I don't know if that... Hang on a minute, I'm just going to check this out. Well, wouldn't you know, the World Meteorological Organization headquarters in Geneva. What a surprise. It's a UN organisation. The World Meteorological Organization to UN, United Nations Plaza. Well, isn't that a surprise? Okay, so the Global Climate Observing System is sponsored by the World Meteorological Organization and numerous UN, EU and scientific bodies, and it collects information that's used for scientific research within the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Ultimately, it forms the basis for promoting and implementing global net zero plans. All right, so now what they say here is that helicopters at this particular station are hovering over the thermometer. Now, I'm looking at this picture here, and those look like heat source pumps to me. They don't look like thermometers. But the Daily Sceptic is not a hysterical publication. It was taken from this video here, which I'm not playing the sound of. But somebody apparently just spent, it says here, an hour or so at RAF Shawbury watching Juno and Jupiter helicopters undergoing flying training in somewhat damp conditions. Now, that means that although the conditions are damp and the weather's bad, the temperature around this area here is going to be, well, quite changed by these machines, because I decided I would check out on the amount of heat a helicopter gives out, and I found the following information. A helicopter generates significant heat, it says here. I always assumed that it would be quite cool around a helicopter because they're like giant fans. But no, it's the engine and the exhaust system. Turbine engines, common in most helicopters, operate at extremely high temperatures, often exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. That's 1,800 Fahrenheit for those of you still using Fahrenheit, in the combustion chamber with exhaust gases, and those are the ones that you'll get coming into the atmosphere, are still reaching several hundred degrees Celsius. Piston engines used in smaller helicopters also produce considerable heat, although less intense, typically around 200 to 300 degrees Celsius in the exhaust. Additional heat comes from the mechanical components like the transmission and rotor hub due to friction, although this is minor compared to the engine. The heat is most noticeable near the exhaust outlets and can affect nearby surfaces or equipment if not properly managed. So it means that if you're near the exhaust of a helicopter, the transferred heat into metal components, probably, they'll heat up. And, well, with predictable results. Cooling systems such as air or oil cooling and heat shields are used to dissipate and redirect this heat to prevent damage to the helicopter's structure or sensitive components. So the helicopter has to have special gadgets installed, special cut-throughs installed to direct the heat away from the helicopter to stop it from being damaged by the amount of heat it's generating. And away means away from the helicopter and into other surrounding objects, the air to start with, but then there'll be other things as well, of course. For context, infrared signatures from this heat make helicopters detectable by thermal imaging, which is a consideration in military applications. So I looked up thermal imaging just because its signatures are more pronounced in cooler environments, e.g. at night or at high altitudes. It means you can see the heat from a helicopter when it's cooler. And of course in Britain it's nearly always cooler. So you're going to get a lot of heat around there that's quite detectable, around the helicopter, that's quite detectable. Okay, so the Daily Sceptic says that these helicopters are hovering over the thermometer. Well, as I said, those look like heat source pumps to me, but they may have, there may be something in there that I'm not detecting. And I do know that the Daily Sceptic doesn't throw stuff out without research. The picture above is taken at the airbase, the main RAF helicopter training centre, and it shows a helicopter next to the white Stevenson box containing the measuring device. Other clips, you couldn't make it up, show helicopters hovering over the screen. So, yeah, I'm taking the Daily Sceptic's word for it, but I do have to say that I don't regard this as 100% proof, simply because I can't identify it. However, as I say, the Daily Sceptic is not hysterical. The image is captured from a YouTube video, which I just showed you, which shows extensive traffic at the base in close proximity to the temperature measuring station. Again, we are obliged to citizen super sleuth Ray Sanders, who's undertaking a forensic examination of the entire Met Office's UK temperature station network. Sanders notes that the heat haze from the engines and the powerful downdrafts from the rotors are clearly visible. He concludes that despite the site being one of the Met Office's most important locations, it is completely worthless for climate reporting. Despite this being a flagship site, it's said to demonstrate the poor standards and total lack of supervision that the Met Office is being allowed to operate to. Well, you know, sometimes you get incompetence, carelessness, and sometimes you get incompetence and carelessness because it's being tolerated as it is of value to somebody who has an agenda. In fact, not only is Shawbury a key location feeding information to international bodies promoting the net zero fantasy, it is also one of only 37 UK stations in the Met Office's historical database. In the case of Shawbury, it shows measurements stretching back to 1946. So you see, in 1946, Shawbury wouldn't have had that sort of helicopter traffic and would have been a lot cooler. So if you have results from Shawbury in 1946 and compare them to now, you are going to get a huge increase in heat, which has to do with the sort of vehicles that are around at the time, which really will make the figures completely worthless if that's what they're doing. The GCOS takes itself very seriously, noting that it supports research towards improved understanding, modelling and prediction of the climate system. Then it says, perhaps the resulting predictions might carry more weight if a little more attention was paid to the data put into the models. When it is not inventing data from 103 non-existent stations. So let's have a look at that. And here we have another article in the Daily Sceptic saying that the Met Office is inventing temperature data from non-existent stations sent to the new Labour Science Minister, Peter Kyle, and that was in 2024, appropriately enough the 5th of November, following a number of Freedom of Information requests to the Met Office and diligent fieldwork visiting individual stations. Sanders has discovered that 103 stations out of 302 sites supplying temperature averages do not exist. I'm going to leave it there. You can look it up on the Daily Sceptic as yourself if you're interested in that sort of thing. Quite a shock, isn't it? I just found this on X.com and I thought it was pretty brilliant. So here, let's have a look at it. Now, you know what, when I saw that man there, so I have to explain, my dog is still shedding. That's the whole house, any tiled floor, you know, we have vinyl tiles in the kitchen and the bathroom, and there's little clumps of fluff, just like tumbleweeds, you know, I find it in corners. It's so bad that I have the vacuum cleaner out in the kitchen. It's not in its usual place anymore. It's just there in the kitchen because every time I go into the kitchen, I see more mini tumbleweed bouncing about the floor. And I saw this guy and I thought, now that would be useful. And if anyone knows who he is, will you pass the message along for me? Will you marry me? Now, this is a serious problem. I'm absolutely, I understand. And she's a Labour MP and, you know, even a stopped clock is right twice a day, providing it's an analogue clock. So I'll just let her speak. And this is Nadia Whittome, MP. And she's right, she is right.
What I'm very concerned about is the impact that this judgment, and particularly the discussion following the judgment and the interpretation.
Oh, just a minute, I have to interrupt because it's not a judgment. It is a clarification of an existing law which had all of the judges in agreement over this, over what it meant. Now, you might say that the law is wrong, then there has to be another law made.
What I'm very concerned about is the impact that this judgment, and particularly the discussion following the judgment and the interpretation of the judgment, will have on trans people.
Now, you see, again, it's not an interpretation of the judgment. It is an interpretation of a law that exists already. Oh, all right, let's get on with it.
Following the judgment and the interpretation of the judgment will have on trans people. This is a group of people, a tiny percentage of the population, who are already demonised and dehumanised.
Right, so as she says, it is a tiny percentage of the population. And they are not demonised and dehumanised by large parts of the media. Again, I've been through this before. There are two sorts, and we're particularly, let's face it, we're particularly talking about men who wish to live as women or wish to parody women, and that's where the problem is. Because there are some, like for instance Jan Morris, and that guy who invented the Moog synthesizer, I've forgotten his name now. It had a Spanish name, Carlos, was it? Anyway, he started living as a woman as well. Both of them went through the operations and just lived as women. They were not demonised or dehumanised in any way. They were regarded more with sympathy. What has happened is that people like Nadia here have allowed a hijacking of this rather tragic mental condition. They've allowed a hijacking of it by people with a specific ideology. I'm not even sure what ideology that is, but they are ideologues. By people with this ideology and by, there's no doubt about it, misogynists who find that their dreadful hatred of women, which if they were wearing a man's suit would be considered bigotry, can be excused if they just put on a skirt and a bad wig. And she doesn't seem to have clocked that one yet. Well, I'll carry on. OK, let's start again.
And particularly the discussion following the judgment and the interpretation of the judgment will have on trans people. This is a group of people, a tiny percentage of the population, who are already demonised and dehumanised by large parts of the media and politicians. And what trans people are saying to me is that, look, put yourself in our shoes.
I can't resist that. She couldn't put herself in their shoes. They'd be far too big.
We are now being told by politicians that if we need to use the public toilet, we have two options. So for a trans woman, for example, either you use the men's toilets, which is what they're now being told, which puts them at risk of violence, but at the very least means outing themselves, or they use the women's toilets, as they have been without any problem for decades, but because of the circus surrounding issues of trans rights,
That's right, because of the circus. But it's people like her who are responsible for the circus. When a man who dresses as a woman, grows his hair like a woman, goes on to hormones, loses the facial hair, and appears like, well, perhaps a slightly heavier built woman, but looks like a woman. If he walked into a women's lavatory and just did what the other women did, you know, acting like a woman, going into the cubicle, then finishing up whatever he's doing there, then comes out, washes his hands, checks his hair, lipstick or something in the mirror, and then goes out just like any other woman, nobody would stop him, and nobody will stop him now. No, women aren't that, in general, women are not that aggressive towards each other in a public lavatory. What is happening, though, is that clowns are coming into the women's lavatories, clowns with evil intent. And so you're talking here, Nadia, about a small group of people who might be victimised as against an entire population of half of this population who might be victimised by this. Yeah, if somebody wants to dress up like a clown, you know, with huge false bosom and far too much makeup and weird wigs, then yeah, they should go into the men's toilet. And if there are any men there who take it unkindly, well, that's just too bad. Although I doubt they will. And the ones that really do look like women, well, that's their business. And that should have been the way all the time. But because of, as she says, the circus that's gone round this, well, when you've got a circus, it's because there are clowns there, isn't it?
We're at greater risk of being harassed by people who have kind of taken it upon themselves to be the gender police.
Yeah, well, she knows all about the gender police. And you have to set this off against the women who feel threatened or worry, or the children who are disturbed by these misogynistic parodies of women turning up in the cloakrooms. Remember, in women's cloakrooms, you're far more likely to find children than you are to find children in a men's cloakroom. And this is absolutely, it's unfortunate, but it's unfortunate because of people like this who are giving a pass to the worst aspects of this whole trans issue. Okay, I can't do this grab bag without talking about Syria again, and this was something I saw on a channel that's hosted by a chap called Mansur Ashkar, who is an Israeli Druze, and I believe he lives in Germany now, but I'm not entirely sure. He comes and goes to Israel as well, of course, to visit his family. And he knows more about the Syrian situation than I do. And he, of course, very knowledgeable. He was also in the Israeli army. So he really does know his stuff when he's talking about matters military in that area. But he made a video about this particular message, which was intercepted, I suppose, by Israeli interceptors, whoever's in charge of doing that. It looks like it was a telegram. And he discusses this. He also discusses a lot more about Syria. I'm going to leave a link to his channel in the description. Assalamu alaikum, my brother in God. I wrote to you 2 days ago regarding to the spoils of war he's referring to. God testifies that I was one of the first people to book one girl. And this time I wrote to you earlier so you wouldn't say to me as the last time that there are nothing left. So here we have somebody who is now placing his tag on whatever females are available. If you remember in my last video, I did mention that one of the perks of being a jihadist is that when you've killed all the men folk of the people you don't like, you've got the women folk that you can make use of. So he went to his fixer or whatever at some time in the past and said, what about my girls? And the fixer said, sorry, they're all taken now. So now he's putting dibs on whatever comes next. But the jihadists will control on Sahnaya and Jarmana. Those are areas, of course, and the number of Sabaya will be many. Sabaya means women, available women. No need to repeat the specifications which I want because you already have them from the last time. I'll bet you he asked for a blonde. A lot of the jihadists are really keen on blondes. I'm sure that you're going to give one of the Sabaya. And remember the most important thing, the money is ready Don't forget me, and I'm sure about the attack. Maulana will be happy from you if you give me one girl of the Sabaya, because I'm on his side. Thank you, brother. I'm waiting for your response. Look, I don't know if this is genuine or not. Mansur evidently believes it is genuine. The point is, it could be genuine. If you look at what went on with ISIS, then you know. I mean, you see there are videos of girls being bartered and sold. So the whole thing is entirely believable and terribly tragic. Syria was run by a brutal dictatorship, and people did disappear. But in general, in the towns, if you kept your head down, you could live a perfectly civilized, well, a reasonably civilized life. A reasonably civilized life. Women could walk out, they had to be a bit careful, but they could walk out without covering up, or they could hold jobs, that sort of thing. And it was a reasonably functioning society. And then Islamism started to take over, and bit by bit it degenerated into anarchy. I had some person telling me, I'm not talking about anarchy, I'm talking about chaos. No, anarchy means no government. And whatever the Al-Jilani thinks, he is not a government. He's just the head of a faction. That's all. Whether that faction will take over or not is another matter. But the whole place is disintegrating. And there it is, anarchy there. All right, well, I just can't stay away from this Syrian business because it is so tragic. And it just shows how fragile any sort of, I'm not going to say democracy, any sort of civilization can be. And of course, that worries me with regard to Britain, because again, in the local elections, yet another so-called independent got a seat. And in this case, an 18-year-old girl. And she, and I don't have it here. I'll put a picture up. Hang on. She is obviously being run by a group of Muslim men. I can't believe she's doing this on her own. But she is in favour of segregation of the sexes, for instance. I mean, she's an idiot. But the one, oh, goodness me, I just remembered. OK, what she said was Muslim women don't like to be in the company of Muslim men, or they're worried about being in the company of Muslim men. And so, for instance, in gyms and that sort of thing, they don't like to be there. And if there was segregation of sexes, then they wouldn't have to be bothered by Muslim men. And you think, what is she saying about Muslim men there? And she took it for granted. And nobody is calling her out on that. Except for me, of course. I just want you to remember the deterioration of Syria because of Islamism, and it worries me about what might be happening in Britain as well. And finally, there's this.
What the? Something must have got loose. They've been stopping. They got cops all up there.
What the hell? Where are you going, buddy?
Wow. It is explained in the Daily Telegraph as follows. It caused a crash, this kangaroo, very irresponsible of it. Local sheriff said when he heard a kangaroo was hopping along the highway, he didn't believe it. A runaway kangaroo named Sheila, of course, caused a car crash and shut down a motorway before being tranquilised by its owner in the US state of Alabama on Tuesday. Alabama Law Enforcement Agency responded to reports of a kangaroo spotted hopping along the side of the Interstate 85 in Macon County, Alabama. and shut down the entire motorway until they could apprehend the animal. Sheila's owner, Patrick Starr, told AP that the animal had escaped from her enclosure on his farm, where he kept her as his personal pet. Kangaroos are, and all those sorts, wallabies too, are famous escape artists. The Isle of Man, for instance, has a wildlife park which had some wallabies in it, and some of them have escaped over the years. And because the Isle of Man's climate is somewhat milder than in most other parts of the British Isles, the wallabies are breeding. And as I understand it, farmers are getting quite annoyed about the wallabies hopping about in their fields eating their crops. So this is a well-known phenomenon. Recording the pursuit on Facebook Live, he said, "When somebody said there was a kangaroo, of course I didn't believe it. Nobody believed it, but I'm looking at him." I was just, one of the reasons I played this video to you is because the very first thing that occurred to me when I saw this was how a person involved in the crash that was caused by this beast were going to make an insurance claim. I mean, can you imagine filling out the document when you're trying to explain the cause of the crash and you write in the insurance investigation form, the crash was caused by a kangaroo jumping out on the road in front of my vehicle? I mean, they are going to come round and check you out for illicit use of certain substances, aren't they? Okay, well, that's the grab bag for the 4th and 5th of May 2025. Till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.